Cartagena de las Indias, in northern Colombia. The natural approach to Cartagena is by sea. It was its excellent coastal location that brought the city its wealth. The Spanish were the first Europeans to come here in the early 16th century. It was immediately apparent that the site was perfect for settlement. It had a natural harbour deep within a broad bay, protected to the seaward side by islands and landward by hills and mountains. As early as 1508, the Spanish considered settling here. Naturally enough, the Indians who occupied the area objected. The Spanish, either through weakness or out of respect for the Indians' wishes, did not drive them out. For the moment, they abandoned their plans. But in 1533 they were back. A flotilla of 3 ships brought 150 men to the spot. The Spanish took possession and founded Cartagena on an island the Indians had now deserted. Before long, it was a prosperous town. Almost all of Spain's trade with its new colonies passed through Cartagena. The town handled commodities of every description. Whatever the Spanish found in the New World, gold or raw materials, went via Cartagena, and everything Spain sent to the colonies passed through the town as well. Cartagena became a wealthy city. But where there is wealth, envy and greed are never far behind. The natural approach to Cartagena is by sea, but anyone with a ship can come by sea, and the enemies of Spain and pirates had ships. The natural position helped the Spanish with the defence of their city. Islands and promontories left only 2 passages by which the harbour bay could be entered. One of these the Spanish blocked. The narrower they protected with 2 fortresses. The fort of San Fernando may well have been comfortable by the standards of the time. Today, it makes a Spartan, bare impression. Still, it had everything a soldier could need: cannon and ammunition, a chapel for prayer, and even toilets that seem almost modern. Cartagena had been under threat ever since it was founded. The settlement was in its infancy when it was first raided by a French pirate. The list of those who came after him is long and studded with famous names: among them Sir Francis Drake, who paid Cartagena one of his famous visits in 1586. The raiders looted and stole whatever they could, and the citizens of Cartagena were perhaps grateful that they did not also burn the city to the ground. Before experience prompted the building of forts on the islands, Cartagena was fortified in the conventional way by a mighty defence wall. 10 meters high and up to 25 thick, it encircled the entire city and had watchtowers and embrasures. To this day, cannon are as typical of Cartagena as the city's graceful, elegant squares and the balconied houses. The attempts to make Cartagena safe cost the Spanish dear. The king complained bitterly of the expense, but presumably it was worth it, otherwise so much money would hardly have been invested. Nor would Cartagena have struck raiders as a worthwhile target at such regular and brief intervals. The churches of Cartagena seem as strongly fortified as the city. Stern and forbidding, they're more like fortresses than churches. For others, the splendour of gold and precious stones. The boast of these churches is their plainness. An excellent example is the harbour-side monastery church where St. Pedro Claver lived. Pedro Claver's was a life of goodness. The wealth of Cartagena derived largely from the slave trade. The city had something of a monopoly. Slaves were not considered human. They counted less than animals. All that mattered was the work they could do. For the voyage to the New World, they were crammed into ships that were mere floating coffins. But no one cared if many died. After all, there were plenty more where those came from. As many as 1,000 slaves were sold in the market every month. The first and only person to see the slaves as more than mere merchandise to be branded like cattle was Pedro Claver. The Jesuit priest would walk the short distance from the monastery to the harbour whenever a slave ship arrived and assume responsibility for the sick and the feeble. He gave them medicine and food, clothing and comfort, and for his pains he was dubbed the slave of the slaves. The mightiest monument to Cartagena's determination to survive is the fortress of San Felipe, built over an entire hill for the city's defence. In 1741, an English admiral, Edward Vernon, took Cartagena. The entire city was in his hands, all but San Felipe. The commemorative coins celebrating Vernon's victory and England's triumph over Spain had even been struck. But then one man turned the tide against the English. The man was Blas de Lezo. With the fortress at his back, He fought regardless of losses, quite literally, for in the fight he lost an eye, an arm, a leg, and finally, as he fought on exhausted, his life. But his example gave his fellow Spaniards the strength they needed to repel the English and save the city. And from that day, Cartagena and San Felipe were held to be invincible. It's all history now, and long forgotten. Today, the subterranean passages of San Felipe, once essential to mere survival, are just a tourist attraction. When the sun sets and dusk settles upon the walls, the fortress no longer seems a place of war. It is as if the rueful patina of times gone by was settling gently on its troubled history.